So I interviewed Toni Preckwinkle. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. But first, we need to talk about a couple of things. Here's a list of topics that I asked her and time codes associated with them. If you're looking for an answer to a specific question, jump right into it. The video that you're watching right now doesn't include all of the topics that I asked Toni. I just can't fit all of it for the sake of time. If you want to watch the full 30-minute unedited video, go to my YouTube channel, Chicago's New Boss. I'm throwing a link to my channel down in the comments. If you can, please consider subscribing to it. Quite honestly, I like YouTube way more than Facebook. If you're going to watch the full unedited 30-minute video, I have two requests for you. For this video, I did edit down some of Toni's answers to get rid of some awkward pauses and redundancies. But don't take my word for it. Hold me accountable and compare this video to the unedited video to make sure that I'm not taking anything of what she says out of context. Also, some of our viewers are deaf or hard of hearing. We don't have the capacity right now to caption a full 30-minute video, but if you think you can help, please message me and we'll find a way to get this captioned and accessible for everyone. Let's jump into the interview. I just wanted to start off by asking, what is your proudest progressive accomplishment in your career?
Wow, that's a hard one. You know, I think it's it's two things. The criminal justice reform work we've done and the work we've done to improve the quality of health care that we deliver and access to health care in Cook County. So 90% of the county's budget is health care and criminal justice. Half of it is health care. We also serve 320,000 people through County Care, our Medicaid expansion program. 320,000 people who didn't have insurance before or only had it sporadically. So it's been a real blessing to those individuals, and it's also been a blessing to our healthcare system because for the first time in 180 years, the last couple of years, we've been in the black. So that's I think, a significant accomplishment. Mm-hmm. On the criminal justice side, we've seen a dramatic reduction in the number of people in the jail accused of nonviolent crimes, and that's a result of bond court reforms, particularly a reduction in the reliance on cash bonds in bond court. We now have 4,000 fewer people in the jail on a daily basis, and we haven't seen an uptick in the number of people who don't show up for their hearings or the number of people who pick up a new charge while they're waiting the disposition of their old one.
So before this interview, I had asked my audience to just submit questions that they would ask either you or Lori Lightfoot. So I have some questions from the audience.
Sure.
So Jennifer asks, what will you do to help Black and Latinx residents of Chicago living in decades-long neglected communities on the south and west sides?
You know, I always talk about the importance of balanced growth. You know, we've got a beautiful, gleaming downtown, and it's the economic engine not just of our city, but of our region and the state. But we can't have a world-class city if we don't have strong neighborhoods, if we don't invest in our neighborhood public schools, in redevelopment of communities that have struggled with disinvestment and neglect for decades, and in improving police-community relations so we can address the public safety challenges that we face. When I was alderman, we built 1,500 units of housing, most of it affordable rental housing, and we've got to invest in those communities that have been neglected and disinvested in for decades.
I think something that pretty much everyone agrees on is that Chicagoans are dissatisfied with the status quo. Chicagoans are looking for change. And you have had several leadership positions now, obviously as the Cook County Board President and the chair of the Cook County Democratic Party. Why should residents believe that you are the candidate of change if the alternative is someone who's branding herself as a political outsider?
Well, you know, I got elected as an outsider, and I have been focused on trying to make change ever since I got elected. And clearly I did that when I was alderman. We achieved change in the communities that I served, better schools, redevelopment, revitalization of our communities, and addressing the public safety challenges. It's one thing to talk about change, it's another thing to actually do it. And on the government side, and as county board president, you know, we've dramatically improved our healthcare system and access to that care. And on the criminal justice side, we've made real significant improvements in criminal justice and reduced the number of people accused of nonviolent crimes who sit in our jail awaiting the disposition of their cases. The other way in which you can make change is to support young people who have political aspirations and want to be public servants. In 1996, I supported a gangly young community activist who wanted to run for the state senate. And actually, that was Barack Obama, who turned out to be President of the United States one day. I was a big supporter of Kwame Raoul in 2004 when Barack Obama went to the U.S. Senate I supported him to be a state senator, and he's now, of course, Attorney General, and Kim Foxx in 2016.
Jay asks, how will you hold CPD and its union accountable for the over $500 million in tax dollar settlement money the city has shelled out in the last 10 years because of their misconduct?
Well, I've said that we need to make a change in the superintendent. You can't address problems that you won't acknowledge, and the superintendent has not acknowledged that there's a code of silence in the police department, nor that there is racism in the police department. The other thing is we have to hold our police department accountable. We need to invest more in their professional development, in better supervision, but we also need to hold them accountable for performance. And only 15 out of every 100 murder cases, a suspect is arrested, and nationally the average is 62 or 63.
So kind of just moving on to some people I think are rather unpopular in Chicago, quite frankly. So let's start with the mayor. Mayor Rahm Emanuel, what do you think is his greatest accomplishment, and what do you think is the biggest mistake he's made in his tenure as mayor?
Well, I think Mayor Emanuel has been a great advocate for our city, particularly for the business community. I think the challenges are around the sort of community relations. He came into office, criticizing teachers, so I'm a teacher by profession, took that personally. And of course there was a teacher strike right off the bat, which I think kind of soured some of his relationships with not just the teachers in the Chicago Teachers Union, but residents of Chicago. And I think it's important for the mayor to be the face of city government and to go out into communities and to talk to people and engage them. And I think that kind of civic engagement was also not a strength.
Moving on to something that I think ended up hurting Chicago's most vulnerable residents, I think Joe Berrios' office was particularly problematic, but this has been an issue that has been politicized, and there has been a lot of misinformation, I think, spread around it. So I guess I just wanted to hear it from you. What do you think Joe Berrios and his office did wrong?
Well, let me just say, I was devastated by the story in the Tribune. We brought in a national expert to try to help us figure out how to address the challenges in our property and taxation system. And I've believed that my job as president of the county is to fix things, whether it's improving the quality and access to health care or our criminal justice system. So we've focused on improving and fixing our assessment instrument with the previous assessor and now with Fritz Kagi. But the basic problem is that our property tax system is inherently unfair. It focuses on residential property and not industrial and commercial property. And that's why I always talk about the importance of having a state progressive income tax to raise money, not just to stabilize the state, but because they raise money and share it with cities, towns, and villages. And if they do that in an equitable way, there's more money for our local units of government, and they're not so reliant on property taxes.
I think that's absolutely right. But I think we have to hold people accountable sometimes for mistakes in policies. It doesn't sound like you're willing to talk about Joe Berrios' specific role in the way property taxes were being assessed. Is that something you'd want to talk about?
Look, there are 11 separately elected officials in Cook County, and each of them is responsible for their own bailiwick. And I, as president, am responsible for the budget of the county, but each of them has responsibility for their own offices. I don't run the office of the treasurer, I don't run the state's attorney's office, I don't run the sheriff's office. When this problem was brought to my attention by the Tribune study, I acted quickly to bring in this national expert to try to help us fix the problem, and then worked with the assessor and now Fritz Kagi to continue to address the problem.
Moving on to, I think, the last figure who I think has hurt people, particularly vulnerable Chicagoans, is Ed Burke. I just wanted to ask, what is your relationship with Ed Burke?
I served with him for 19 years in the city council. We were neither friends nor allies. On every divided vote, we were on opposite sides. But I think the critical issue is, should elected officials in the city have outside employment? When I was elected alderman, I quit my job and became a full-time alderman. As county board president, I've been a full-time county board president, and I'm convinced that our residents should not have to think that their elected officials are choosing between their clients and their constituents. Mm-hmm. They should know that their elected officials are working for them full-time.
So I want to thank you first for releasing your tax returns. It's unfortunate that I have to thank you for that because that should be an expectation from all candidates. Is that something that you would fight for, making sure that releasing tax returns is mandatory for elected officials?
Sure, I think people should know what people have done with their lives.
I agree. Speaking about transparency, given the national conversation about the relationship between elected officials and journalists, I think transparency with the media is more important than ever. And of course, I thank you for doing this interview. I think it's really fantastic. But personally, I don't think that the current mayor has set a good example of the relationship between the mayor and the press. And I've seen some journalists know your lack of availability for questions before the runoff. Do you plan on building a better relationship with the press and more access if you were to be mayor?
Well, I'm right here now.
That's true, and I appreciate that. But I think you understand where my concern comes from, given that this was a really important period where, like, weeks before the runoff, and you were kind of radio silent.
I wouldn't agree. That's not true. You know, we had a number of press availabilities and opportunities for people to sit down with me personally and individually. So I think we were very available to the press.
I disagree with Toni's characterization of her press availability. Toni often didn't make herself available after televised forums. Her team didn't release public campaign schedules, and she gave fewer Q&As after county board meetings in the last 2 weeks leading up to the runoff. I sent the clip of Toni's answer to NBC Chicago's reporter Mary Ann Ahern. She totally disagreed with Toni's assessment and described Toni as providing very limited access in the last several weeks leading up to the runoff. Toni's relationship to the press at the time was concerning. But let me stand up for Toni for just a second. Toni took my interview. Toni's team knew that I wasn't just going to toss softballs, but they still didn't give me any restrictions or ask for a list of pre-approved questions. That's the way it should be done. Still waiting to hear back from Lori Lightfoot's campaign. This is something that was really important to me. Ranked choice voting. It would have been, I think, a much easier way of finding out who Chicago votes for, especially with 14 candidates that just happened. Do you support ranked choice voting?
No.
Can I ask why?
I think that it makes more sense to have, you know, just outright elections and runoffs, and that's where we are now.
And why does it make more sense?
You know, it's hard for me to figure out how you translate, you know, rank voting into a real expression of the public will. You know, there were 14 candidates. People made their choice. The top 2 candidates are now in the race for the mayor's office. So I think that's an appropriate outcome when there are multiple candidates in a race. Honestly, I'm personally bummed out by this answer. If you want to hear about why I think our voting system is broken, watch episode 14. What would be your first priority as mayor? Well, I'd talk about 3 things. 1, improving the quality of our neighborhood schools and being sure that there are good public schools in all of our communities. That's first. Second, rebuilding neighborhoods that have struggled with disinvestment and neglect. And some of our neighborhoods, those are communities that I'm more familiar with, and some of our neighborhoods are challenged with gentrification, but focused on how are we going to preserve and strengthen our neighborhoods. And that's just not housing, it's also investing in small and medium-sized businesses. I've proposed that we increase the amount of money that the city contributes to the Chicago Micro-Lending Institute, which provides $500,000 to $50,000 loans to small businesses in our neighborhoods, and that we also make better use of the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, which now is a rebate program. You put out the money and then you get it back. But in many of our black and brown neighborhoods, the businesses don't have access to capital. So it's hard for them to get the money that they're going to get back eventually. So it needs to be an outright grant program. But we need to invest in neighborhood businesses, and one way to do that is with micro-lending or with outright grants to help people build, maintain, sustain their businesses. The other thing is, you know, you've got to have living wages for people who are working. And that's why I propose a $15 an hour minimum wage, and that be instituted by 2021 so that, you know, people who can support their families. And $15 an hour just enables a family of 4 to be above the poverty level. It's not extravagant. Last question. What's the best pizza place in Chicago, and why is it Pequod's? This is from why is it Pequod's?
Yeah. Pequod's doesn't endorse us or support us, so it doesn't have to be Pequod's, but that was the audience question. My favorite neighborhood restaurant is Pizza Capri. Pizza Capri. I wouldn't have thought that. Is it the one in Hyde Park?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to that one a lot. Great. Well, thank you so much, President. I really appreciate you sitting down for this interview. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the way that interview went. I think for the most part, Toni gave substantive, detailed answers. The only three things that really stuck out for me was that I'm not sure she really answered my question on Joe Berrios. I don't agree with her characterization of her relationship with the press in the last 2 weeks leading up to the runoff. And I was a bit disappointed about her thoughts on ranked choice voting. Obviously, some of those issues are more important than others, but just wanted to let you know. I want to thank Toni and her team for doing this interview. I really hope that Lori Lightfoot is next. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope this interview was helpful. Remember to check out the YouTube channel, Chicago's New Boss, and if you want to support this web series, donate to my Patreon, patreon.com/ChicagosNewBoss.